Welcome, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be presenting at the Cologne ACE. I'm a developer advocate at Atlassian. I'm here to introduce you to our next generation cloud app development platform that we call Forge. I'm going to show you some fundamentals that I hopefully will resonate with anyone, regardless of your role or your level. The team that I'm on is called Developer Experience, and our team's mission is really to unleash the power of developers within our ecosystem, trying to help inspire them, guide them, educate them, and support the developers to build just great apps on our platform. So this talk, Forge in 25, originally Forge in 40, is a very quick introduction to the Forge platform. I'm going to highlight some of the benefits, make examples of what you can build, and show you really how quick it is to get started and unlock a whole new level of extensibility so you can build powerful tools for just yourself, for your team, or maybe even for thousands of teams worldwide if you were to decide to build something in the marketplace. Forge is our next gen platform for extending and customizing our products. There are significant advantages that Forge has over previous Atlassian app development frameworks. It was built with a developer experience that simplifies app development, improves performance, enhances security, helps developers build apps that are just flexible and powerful and deliver a great customer experience. Perhaps you're not a developer and you're thinking, well, who is using Forge and why would they use it? Well, let me start by saying that some of these aren't distinct groups, but just general buckets of who's using Forge today. So developers, obviously, after all, it is an app development platform. We also have admins and power users that use Forge to build apps for their organizations. Believe it or not, there's also quite a bit of end users now who are picking up and using Forge just to improve how they work within the Atlassian products. Forge was built to be easy to get started, like out of the box. And you'll see if you watch any of our videos or look at some of our documentation or the sample apps, it really is intended to kind of get you started very quickly. So end users are starting to notice that and take advantage of that. Obviously, partners, both solution partners and marketplace apps are being built on Forge more now than ever before. And of course, Atlassian, my team members ourselves, like thousands of Forge apps are built and used internally by Atlassian employees today. And that bodes well that when we externalize a platform that we also deeply use internally, that's a very good and healthy sign. Probably most of you or some of you are familiar with the Atlassian marketplace. You're going to find some really great examples of like essential power tools for customers and some fantastic UI integrations and back-end automation apps. And more of those are being built on Forge, and we're going to highlight a few of those later. And it wouldn't be a prezo without kind of showcasing some slides with some big fat numbers on them. There's over 6,000 apps in the marketplace, and there's even more custom-built, like in-house apps into the tens of thousands. And a majority of our customers heavily rely on apps. Over 70% of Jira software and Confluence Cloud customers use at least one marketplace app, but it's often usually a bit more than that. And when it comes to the importance of apps, just don't take my word for it. I mean, in January of last year, Atlassian Marketplace surpassed 3 billion in lifetime sales, and it took 7 years to reach the first billion in sales, and it took only 2 years to hit the second. So just over a little year later, it crossed the 3 billion mark. And you might be thinking with numbers like that, 6,000 apps, billions in sales, that everything has already been built, every use case and problem has already been addressed. But let me assure you, that is not the case. Certainly, there are several ideas and use cases that as a user, you'd love to see addressed, some pet peeves and problems with how you work with our product, or you just think, man, it could really be better. And usually that's kind of how it starts. When you dig into the origin story of some of the apps that are flourishing in the marketplace, you hear about how the developer just built a little hack or an add-on to make their job just a little bit easier, something to solve their own problem, to make Jira or the Confluence experience better just for them. And that's what it really comes down to, solving a problem, delivering value. And depending on what your role is at your company, or perhaps your technical level or acumen, you might be asking, well, why would I use it? Why would I use Forge, and what kind of app would I build? Sometimes the inspiration for what to build starts with something small, like an itch that you need to scratch. And I just want to share a real personal story about one of those. Does anyone know what this machine is? Well, it's called a trencher, and it does that. It digs trenches. And several years ago, my wife had a business just selling industrial equipment. She listed on eBay, and back in eons ago, there was a buyer who was interested in it, and they asked a question online. And over the weekend, we didn't get to that question, but they were asking, hey, how quickly could you arrange shipping? And that was a problem back in 2005. This is before eBay had an app and even before smartphones. And 2 days later on Monday, my wife responds, it's ready to go. I'd love to sell you this thing. In fact, that was probably one of the most common questions that buyers ask, like how fast can you ship this thing? And a couple days later, after she responded, we realized that the buyer responded to us and said, sorry, it's a little late, right? Like we really needed this thing. We needed some confirmation. And they went someplace else. So wife had an itch to scratch, and that was, is there any way that you can maybe build an app that could maybe send me an SMS? This is SMS, this is again, pre-smartphones. And so whenever a question was asked, and so anyway, I built a little MVP, a little proof of concept, and my wife was very happy. Sales increased. Anytime somebody asked a question, she got a response. Very, very small app, wasn't a whole lot of code, wasn't extremely reliable, but it did work for the most part. And her sales increased like dramatically because now with the kinds of equipment she sold, she was able to respond very quickly whenever people had questions. Again, the primary question was how fast can you ship this thing? Because in her business, that was very important. So fast forward a few years later, eBay announced that they had a marketplace that they were opening. My wife strongly suggested I build out a proper app, right? That instead of this little tiny hack that I built for her, long story short, I grew that app into a multi-tenant SaaS app, became a launch partner with their marketplace. And within a few months, instead of just sending my wife a couple, 2 or 3 messages a day, we're sending thousands of messages a day to eBay sellers all around the US. And the moral of the story here is that you never know where the inspiration is going to come from for like the next big thing. Maybe it's not the next big thing you're trying to build. Maybe it is just that little small itch you want to scratch, but you just never know. Like that's kind of how things typically start. All right, so onto the agenda. We're going to start with a very quick live coding demo to show you how easy it is to build an app. I'm going to introduce the Forge platform and its benefits. Based on the time, I'm probably going to go a little bit more than 25 minutes, but we'll still have plenty of time for Q&A. We'll do a little bit more live demo coding and to finish up with a peek under the hood to kind of talk about some of the fundamentals, the things that will help you understand the primitives of Forge. Even if you're not a developer, maybe some of the stuff might sound a little bit foreign, but it's no big deal. I think that these are just good fundamental things that you can have in the back of your head so that when you see documentation later or you watch a video later, it'll click of something that you've heard before. All right, what's the first thing you do when you're learning a new language or a framework? You build a Hello World app. And Forge apps are built in either TypeScript or JavaScript. We're going to use JavaScript. And to create an app, we're going to go into create the app. We're going to test it, deploy it, and install it on my personal test instance. So how long do you expect it would take to stand up a Hello World app, deploy it into the cloud, install it on a live Jira instance? Like a few days, a few hours? Well, it shouldn't take any more than just a few minutes because we're going to do it in 4 simple steps. This is all on the documentation, but it's nice to see it like live and happen. We're going to just basically do from the command line after we installed a couple tools. I already have the tools kind of pre-installed on my computer here. We're going to type in Forge create. We're going to select a template for the kind of app we want to build. We're going to deploy it into the cloud and we're going to install it. All right, so here's where we hope that the demo gods will be kind. So let's head to the command line and here we go. I just type in Forge create, make it a little bigger. We're just going to call it Hello Cologne and we're going to go with something really simple. Let's go UI kit, Jira, and these are just templates. They're kind of like pre-baked little boilerplate code depending on the thing you want to build. And I'm going to go with Jira issue panel just to kind of show you how we're going to say Hello World right inside the Jira issue view. Now, some of the templates are very rudimentary and very simple, and we're going to, in the next demo, I'll go a little bit deeper, but here we go. So it created a directory called Hello Cologne. If you go inside of that, this is the layout. Looks a little bit like this. So let's open this up into Visual Studio Code. In this, there's 2 particular files we're looking at. One is called the manifest. And a manifest is kind of like the blueprint of your app. It showcases which modules you're using and which product you're extending. So in this case, we're using this thing called the Jira issue module. And then here's the source code for that. And all we're going to say is, okay, great. In the manifest, it shows the name of the app, the function name, and then the reference to the index file, which is where our source code is. And then inside that index file is just the code. And in this code, we have some basic things that we're just going to return some text, some markup, a text fragment here that says Hello Cologne. And we have this thing Forge UI. So let's go back to the command line and let's do an npm install Forge UI. And we're going to type in Forge deploy. And it's going to do some syntax checking, then bundle up all of our code and upload it into the Atlassian cloud. At this point, when it's done doing this, it's not installed on my test instance quite yet. We have to do one more command. The equivalent of like going to Marketplace and installing an app, we're going to do it manually with this thing, with a command Forge install once this is done. Here we go. So here we go, Forge install. and Jira, type in your test instance name. Don't suggest you do this on your company's production instance. Okay, now it says it's installed. So let's go and see where the heck did this thing install it. We'll go over to our board here. So I'm reloading. I'm on my test instance here. And let's go into a view issue. And there it is right there. So if I click on this thing, we should see the text. Hello, clone. Yay. So not incredibly impressive in terms of its utility, but you saw how easy it was to stand up an app in the cloud. Now, mind you, it's not, again, even architecturally and design-wise for this app, it's nothing super impressive. But the fact of the matter is if you had 10,000 users hitting this right now, they would all be able to see this button magically appear. And if it was doing more complex things, again, the fact that this is running inside the Atlassian cloud, I didn't have to stand up any infrastructure. I'm not meaning like hosting any kind of services. This all is running within the Atlassian cloud. Okay. And just to kind of show you that this is really live, let's go over to the editor again. And then we'll say hello, Cologne, and loss. I think I saw Ireland. Hello, Cologne and Ireland. Let's save that. And we're going to use this cool feature called the tunnel. And this allows you to do some live iterative development. I don't have to actually deploy it back into the cloud. Any requests from my development environment, which means the instance in which I have it installed, is going to run those requests through my local dev instance here. And so we'll be able to see some console output here. So let's go back to the browser and let's close this out, reload. We're going to go into this issue again, click on this, and what we should see, there it is. And we can actually see from the console that this was invoked. The invocation went to my laptop as opposed to going to the one that was deployed in the cloud. Now that I know that it works, let's say, hey, that was a really great update. I could say forge deploy. And for every other instance that had my app installed, that's on my dev instance, it would automatically update. So again, very, very simple example, but that's a very quick way to get started. You'll see some of those things in our documentation. Let's get a little bit deeper into the Forge platform. But first, I would say it's great to start with a little bit of history about where we came from. So a little brief historical look back at our product and platform extensibility. And it might be particularly useful for those that kind of go way back. In 2008, we introduced an app development platform called Plugins 2 or P2. It's still used today for building apps for our on-premises products like Jira Data Center and Confluence Data Center. Apps built on P2 are directly installed on the server, so behind the firewall, and interface to the host product through OSGI layers and APIs. And in 2014, a new generation framework was developed for our cloud-based products called Atlassian Connect. When building an app on Connect, you build the app, you have to host it on your own, and through the Connect framework, you can extend Atlassian products interacting through iframes, webhooks, and web APIs. When building a P2 app for Server DC, you could lean on the platform to handle data storage, logging, and authentication. But building an app in the cloud with Connect, you were responsible for building, maintaining, and hosting a web app that is reliable, performant, and secure. Again, a huge difference there. And there are useful SDKs and libraries to help you get started, but ultimately running an app based on the Connect framework in the cloud, you need to be fairly competent in cloud architecture and ops, particularly if your app does anything mission critical or important. Now we have the Atlassian's Forge platform. It's our next generation platform for extending and customizing Atlassian products. It became generally available back in 2021. And since then, it has quite a bit of investment and improvements. It does offer some significant advantages over Connect. With Forge, a lot of the developers say that they experience a simplified development experience. They love the improved performance, enhanced security, and its ability to deliver a seamless user experience. So let's break that down. It runs on Atlassian. It's Atlassian hosted, you might hear us say. And what that means is that gone are those days of managing infrastructure, provisioning servers, worrying about scaling. With Forge, you can focus solely on writing code, building amazing functionalities for Jira Confluence, Bitbucket, and Compass. The serverless nature of Forge ensures that you can effortlessly deploy your apps without the hassle of maintaining infrastructure, leaving you with more time and energy to do the important things like innovate. In terms of the second part here, rapid app development, it is very quick to get started building. Even for those that don't consider yourselves software developers, we sometimes refer to Forge as a low-code platform because it handles a lot of the heavy lifting for you. It helps simplify development by managing authentication. If you notice in that sample code, like we didn't have to actually authenticate anything. It just kind of happens automatically. And it helps simplify operations by handling scale and storage. And lastly, Forge provides you with over 40 extension points, and you still have access to hundreds of APIs across our products, including not just Jira, but JSM, Confluence, Bitbucket, and Compass. Whether you want to build an app that sits within the UI of an Atlassian product, or build a back-end integration with an external system, or even build a custom Jira workflow, Forge has you covered. So as a result, Forge lets you focus more on the innovation of your apps, the things that make your app unique, and worry less about the infrastructure aspect. So we've talked about some of the developer benefits of the platform, but what kind of apps can you build? Now, theoretically, there are countless types of apps that you can build with Forge, but I'm going to bucket them into 3 groups, and you can add features and functions within the user interface. Your app can also perform automation tasks in the background, triggered by events that occur within the product, or your app could also provide integrations with external platforms. First, let's talk about in-product apps, ones that are integrated directly into the product UI. Our Hello World was extremely rudimentary, but that was one example, right? We were embedded inside the view of the issue panel. For example, here, an app that runs within Jira or Confluence, Jira users know that there are many different screens and views for projects, boards, and issues. And Forge provides the ability to smoothly and seamlessly integrate your app into many different screens, not just a view issue, but many screens across the product UI. One example, dynamic forms for Jira by Divinity. It's a great example of rich UI features. It helps users to streamline data by allowing customers to build like super intelligent forms to enter data into Jira. Fields can be displayed based on condition or even past user behavior. So it's very dynamic. And I think this is a really cool example of a rich UI integration. The next type of app I'll call is an automation. And these are apps that provide complex workflow conditions, evaluate and inject data in the background, performing tasks, reacting to conditions, or can even run on predetermined schedules. So AutoPage by Seberg, right? It automatically creates Confluence pages from a Jira issue. And what this does, it helps customers keep their docs in sync. Config for this app is done on the Jira side, but it dynamically generates pages on the Confluence side. It's a little bit of automation and integration if you were to consider it being a Jira to Confluence integration. And then the last one, third type of the bucket I have here is integrations. And this is a Forge app that builds a bridge or a pipeline to an external product or platform into the user's workflow within an Atlassian product. I think a great example of this is AWS's Service Management Connector for JSM, where customers can make the AWS Service Catalog available in certain JSM projects. So with this app, customers can manage, provision AWS resources, and users can provision, update, execute automation, and even terminate AWS resources to which they have been granted access right from within JSM. And I think this is a kind of a cool one. This is AI tables for Confluence. So this is quite a popular area now. We're seeing a lot of people integrating with ChatGPT, et cetera. Here, customers can create tables within Confluence using just natural language. But really behind the scenes, what's happening is there's a ChatGPT integration happening here to create tables with just natural language. So Forge, it goes beyond Jira. It's a framework that allows apps to be built for a range of products. We have extensibility points that are product specific, allowing you to create and enhance experiences across Jira, JSM, Jira Work Management, Bitbucket, Confluence, and Compass. But let's build another app on Forge. This time, let's fix a pet peeve that sometimes you might have when it comes to using Kanban boards in Jira. Out of interest of time, I think I might just hop into the IDE and go right for kind of it's baked a little bit. Now, I did build this using Forge Create, and I did go to the documentation and copy and pasted some code. So what's different here? We're in this Jira work in progress validator, and really what we're going to do, maybe I'll go back to the presentation just for a moment here. So if you use Kanban boards, and you might be using work in progress limits, and those are limits to kind of a maximum of a number of issues in work in progress column. It's a feature that lets you set a work in progress maximum, a column maximum, and it's supposed to encourage your team members to complete work before they pick up new tasks. The problem is that it doesn't actually enforce anything. You can drag as many issues into that column as you want, and it just kind of turns it red, right? So very easy to ignore if you're an engineer trying to pick up some new work. So I think it'll be really cool. What could we do to enforce that? We could build a workflow extension to like a validator, a Forge module that will ensure that a maximum of 3 issues will be in that in progress state at any one time. Validators, they execute in real time. When a user attempts to transition, we bind this Forge app, our new validator, to the in progress transition, right? Back to this. This is the app that we would do it with, and the source code is quite simple. So basically what this is that we have this, again, this was very much copy pasted from documentation. We have, this is a kind of our function right here. And I put these comments in here. We need to determine how many issues are in the in progress status, and we need to use the API to JQL search that. So I just kind of constructed a JQL query here. In this particular project, we're going to look for something, all things that are in status. And we're going to execute the API call as the app, not as the user. Then we're going to send a JQL query here. Notice authentication completely handled. And then what we're going to wait for is the response, and the response we're going to pull from the API response, the total in progress, that are the total number of issues in progress. And we're going to yank that here from the response dot total. And then from there, we're going to use that here. If the total in progress is less than 3, we're going to let it continue. If it's not less than 3, we're going to send an error. Just for giggles here, let's go pre-recorded, but this is the gist. We copied and pasted a bunch of code, and with this validator, we're setting some rules. And the first thing we want to do is we want to make it so that it'll stop the work, it will stop a transition from occurring if we have more than 3 items in a column. So you can see here, it doesn't really restrict us. We could add 4. And in our code, we want to enforce this rule, and then we add this to our workflow. And I'll just kind of fast forward in this video. So you can see why. So we add this to our workflow condition called work in progress validator. And now we publish this. Lovely. And now when we go back and we try to bring something in, it will decline it, right? And so that's the idea here. What we're really showcasing is that you have the ability to do more than just pop something in the UI. You have some very, very detailed, like, and intricate controls over things like workflows. And there's modules to do conditions, post functions, etc. Some fundamentals and things that I probably showed you, but you might not know what the heck they mean. The CLI, command line interface. It's whether you're using a Mac or a PC, this is the primary tool you use to create and deploy apps. You saw me at the command line typing things like Forge create, Forge deploy, Forge install. Those are the command line tools that we're using. The CLI intended to be very simple and easy to use. You just type in Forge create, Forge install. But if you just type in Forge and hit enter, you can see all the different kinds of things that you can do. One thing that you did not see me do is I did a Forge login and I typed in some of my credentials, and that's how it knew to create the app under my account, etc. The next fundamental part is those things called modules. So you can think of modules as building blocks for your app. In Forge, we provide modules which allow you to extend and interact with our products. They define what your app is capable of doing. So whatever module your app needs, you just have to add it to your manifest. And that's what we're going to be talking about in a second. In our example, like we had our Hello World, we use the Jira issue panel module. It just adds an issue panel to the view. And then when the apps button is clicked, it kind of generates that thing down below in the activity panel. There's also another UI extension called the Jira project page. And in that, it's a full page view. And I don't know why my thing keeps on advancing. The other module that I demoed with the video was this here module called the Jira Workflow Validator. And this allows you to add validators to workflows. And again, you can add, honestly, 3 lines of JavaScript, 2 lines of JavaScript, and you can add very advanced conditions to validate that values are true before a transition can take place. You can block transitions and revert them. With this particular module, you don't even have to write JavaScript at all. You could just use a Jira expression and even send an error message. And this one at the very bottom, it says, hey, if the assignee is null, then say it failed because there's no one assigned to the task. And modules aren't just UI based, right? Like here's a set of modules called triggers. These are particularly useful for automation. So the first one's a product trigger. And if an issue is updated and you'd like to have your app do something when that occurs, product triggers take care of that. A function within your app is invoked when a certain product event happens. It's kind of a webhook. You just have to define these things inside your manifest. In this one here, updated issue. And there's a wide variety of product events, issues being created, updated, assigned, comments being made, custom fields being set. To learn more about that, you can just go.atlassian.com/Jira Events or just check out the documentation. Schedule triggers, kind of similar to a cron job, something like you can run on a regular schedule. If you can repeatedly invoke a function after certain types of time intervals, like this is what you would use. If your app needs to automatically generate an hourly, daily, or weekly report without user needing to request them, like this is really handy for that. And a web trigger is really cool for external integrations. It lets you create a URL within your app in which if you call that URL from an external source, it'll invoke a function in your Forge app. So the use case for a web trigger is you're building an integration with an external system. Or if you have a service-to-service scenario, web triggers fit in perfectly there. There are many, many modules. Those are just a few that I mentioned, and you can just go to go.atlassian.com/Jira modules, or you can just head to the docs. Modules exist for more than just UI. There are common modules and product-specific modules, like the product trigger I just covered. To add this, you simply add that module to your manifest, and that's it. That manifest is just a file that kind of contains the blueprint of your app. Permissions, will kind of slide through this one, but inside the manifest, for every single API that your app accesses, you'll have to have the right scope added to the permissions section of your manifest. And then lastly, particularly if you are hosting any kind of external assets like CSS or JS, or if you're doing things like having to interface with an external API, you would define these also in the manifest. So if you wanted to do an integration with ChatGPT or Microsoft's translator in their artificial intelligence lab, you can do that. You just have to define that. And then whenever a user decides to use your app, they'll be prompted, do they agree to egress data out to some third party? All right, permissions, something bigger than I'd probably talk about here, but you can just go over to the permissions section of the documentation and learn all about that. And there's plenty of information there to help you. Manifest, again, just a YAML file, yet another markup language. It just describes your app. It looks like this. You've seen it a couple times on my IDE. And every time you create an app, it automatically creates 3 environments for you: development, staging, and production. In this case, when I was demoing it, everything was done in the development environment. And this is really cool because now if you were to do some iterative development, you could do this all in development and then in staging. And when things are ready to promote to production, like if you had this app installed on hundreds or tens or hundreds or thousands of instances worldwide, your team can utilize these environments for CI/CD practices, allowing your team to iterate and test and deploy new features and improvements smoothly. We did not go over this, but environment variables. So you're like, if I need to store data to environment variables or app stores, if I'm accessing some external resources, we do provide key value pairs inside for some storage so that you can have environment variables that will satisfy both. And they're environment variables for each one, for development, staging, and production. So a different set, kind of all compartmentalized, great for, again, CI/CD, all available through the Forge CLI, Forge variables list, to list them all, or you can set values or encrypt them as well. You can learn more about this in the docs. The dev loop's quite simple. Like you saw me, I did a create, I did a deploy, I did an install. And it was built that way intentionally to be very, very simple, to really simplify kind of that dev loop of iterative development. And one thing that's not listed here is the tunnel, but in terms of testing, like live testing, the Forge tunnel helps with that as well. Early in the talk, I mentioned that Forge was built with the intent of simplifying app development. And we found that marketplace apps that were built on Forge, 82% of them were built and launched within 3 months or less of when they started building. So where can you get started? If you head over to go.atlassian.com/Forge101, tutorials, examples, reference docs, etc. And you can also find some really cool things on our developer blog in terms of creating AI integrations and AI apps, etc. Awesome. Thanks, folks.